Hello everybody and welcome back to 4th Age Guides. Today we are taking a look at the City-kingdom of Tharbad. This is a Dunedainic faction, but it's a Dunedainic faction with a bit of a twist. Unlike the other two, the Reunited Kingdom and the Kingdom of Adunabar, Tharbad is a very small faction, and it also has a lot of influences from surrounding cultures. So you can see this part of the map is, it basically begins with territory right along the Grey Flood River. And if you know your Tolkien, you know that Tharbad is located right where that river narrows. Now, this mod, of course, is set in the 4th Age of Middle-earth, after the War of the Ring, after Elessar has reestablished the North and the South Kingdom. But given that we foresaw this civil war happening, this growth of a shadow cult, which we imagined might lead to an eventual civil war within the Reunited Kingdom, hence the inclusion of this Kingdom of Adunabar, we imagined that there might be some other forces, some other players that might seek the opportunity to break away, and we pictured Tharbad might be one of those. Tharbad is kind of an interesting settlement. Not a lot is known about this place. We know that when Boromir crossed here on his way to the Council of Rivendell, he lost his horse trying to ford the river, so the bridge was already cast down. But in its heyday, this was a fairly important place. It controlled not only the trade routes along the river, but also the old north-south road that went all the way from Fornost through Bree, through Tharbad, through Enedwaith or Dunland, and down into Rohan and Gondor. And we imagine that in the 4th Age, of course, kings of the Reunited Kingdom would want to establish this as a trading hub again. But being kind of far away from the centers of power in both the north and the south, it would leave them potentially vulnerable to dangers and potentially interested in seizing their own independence. So that's what we've gone for in the mod. In some ways, Tharbad represents the future of Middle-earth. This is not a faction that is content to rest on its laurels and tradition like perhaps the Reunited Kingdom is, but maybe more like Dale. This is a kingdom that is embracing new technologies and looking at the surrounding cultures to influence its future. Tharbad is classified as a bull-roaring faction in terms of difficulty. That's hard as opposed to, say, very hard. And I think that's accurate. Unlike some of the factions out in the east, Tharbad doesn't have a ton of options for expansion. And so that's one of the things that we're going to talk about, how you can best leverage those opening moves, what kind of units and buildings you'll have available, and how you can sort of put it all together to pull off a winning strategy as this new kingdom. Now, in terms of the composition of the faction itself, Tharbad's family members have, I think, 3 or 4 different subcultures from which they are drawn. The ruling family, or the ruling subculture rather, is going to be a Gondorian. So this, our governor, the Merchant King of Tharbad, the governor of Tharbad itself, is a man of Gondorian descent, whereas in Lond Dare you're going to see, as you can see by the name here, Freka, he is a man of Dunlanding descent. So you can see there's going to be quite a mix here of different cultures, different sub-factions within your faction. And a thing to keep in mind, if you're playing the authority game and you're trying to get your faction leader to highest authority as possible, and you're trying to get your family members to be as loyal as possible in terms of this opinion of liege trait, is remember that family members with a different subculture or different sub-faction from the faction leader will tend to be less loyal. So just keep that in mind as you're expanding. So some strengths for Tharbad. Well, as we're going to see, there is an interesting amount of unit variety available to them, especially in terms of infantry, and they do have some strong ranged infantry troops, but an undeniable weakness is cavalry. Let's take a quick look at what you can train. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we will do a video all about the battle prospects for Tharbad. But at Tier 1, you're going to see just your basic militia troops in your homelands. At Tier 2, you start to get things like spears, axemen, and bowmen. Tier 3 is where you can get your cavalry. These are these merchant scouts, as well as some pikemen and swords. And at Tier 4 is where you get your longbowmen as well as your bodyguard, a merchant guard. Now, your bodyguard is an infantry unit. And so really you only get this one cavalry unit at all in your homelands. That makes Tharbad, I believe, the least cav-friendly faction on the entire map. Even the dwarves get several hireling cavalry units, so it's kind of an interesting limitation to work around. These guys don't have a lot going for them necessarily. They're relatively weak in prolonged melee, but they do have a very respectable charge bonus. So you'll want to be using them on the charge for hit and run. You want to really master that the charge there. Don't just click them at a unit and expect it to work. You need to line them up and make sure you pull off a good charge. But really the advantages for Tharbad are going to be their bowmen, eventually the city longbowmen, and some of these other infantry troops like these axemen of Tharbad, which are surprisingly resilient, and your Tharbad pikemen, which are, as you can tell, influenced by Dunlending elite troops. So a lot of different influences there with cavalry based on Rohan types, swordsmen and longbows based on the Dunedainic version, axemen that are sort of based on, or at least drawn from the sort of native Arnorian or Enidwaith culture, and pikemen based on Dunlendings. So kind of a melting pot here. Let's look at buildings for a moment. Tharbad has quite a few options here. They can build stone walls. Actually, they've already got them here in Tharbad. They can build up to 4 tiers of military development, as we've seen, build up to 4 tiers of farms and merchants, all the usual industry type of buildings. And it's worth noting that Tharbad begins with a timber resource, which is very nice indeed. They also have some fish. There's timber resource down at Londadare with fish as well. So they do have some potential in terms of trade and industry. They also have some notable havens and ship options. So Tharbad itself already is built up to the highest level here, but we can also get all the way up to the Alcarondas, which is a pretty substantial ship. You can ignore this. For some reason, looking at the building browser yields this blank screen sometimes when you're looking at units. But in-game, that does actually show up. So the Palaran and the Alcarondas, as you can see, 112 soldiers per ship there. So this is essentially putting you on the same footing as the Reunited Kingdom, just about, for your fleets. So if you get to that point where you want to start to wage naval warfare, you're in a quite good position indeed. Other buildings, we have just Dunedainic culture, so you don't get to switch rosters. You can't convert to the Shadow Cult necessarily to get different troops. You're going to be just straight up Dunedainic here. And that means you do get some more advanced building types, such as places of healing, mirth, and notably those libraries. Libraries which will allow you to train ballistas, which is, again, a very nice option, provided you have the hosting halls that are the Tier 3 building as well. So Tharbad has some good options. Now, the fact that the capital city is a chief city means that you probably won't need to do military development in your other settlements, at least until you start to get further afield. So you can basically rely on your best troops coming out of just Tharbad, with Greyholm and Londadare being content with those tier 2 rosters, which, as we've seen, gives you axemen, spears of the bridge, and those mariner bowmen. So that should be sufficient. In terms of finances, despite being a quote-unquote trading faction, Tharbad actually does not do too well in terms of income, at least initially. It takes a while. And part of the problem is that although you are at peace initially with everybody, in fact, you're not even at war with the rebels to start, therefore you're trading with everybody, the sad reality is that very soon you're going to be drawn into wars with all or most of your neighbors, and that's really going to hurt your trading income. So what you may want to do is be very targeted in your expansion. And once you do reach other factions, like if you conquer over towards Moria, where you can actually begin to trade with the dwarves, or conquer near to the Shire, where you can trade with them, you're going to want to make sure that you do have those trade agreements in place, so that will work for you. initially, as we saw, you are not at war with anybody, but that should change very soon. So the question is, how do I expand? Where are we going to go to develop this kingdom? Well, if you are like me, you would initially think there's some nearby rebel settlements, like Swanfleet is unwalled. Nobody's here. I may as well grab that right now. And there are some other rebel settlements over to your west. Let me just remove the fog of war here to show you what that looks like. Again, these are all unwalled and apparently very inviting places for you to seize. The problem with doing that, though, initially, is that these places are very poor, very small population sizes, and very slow growers. So you're going to be spending more in resources than they are going to be worth initially. To your south, you have Dunland as well as some rebel settlements, but again, these are so small that it's just not worth it to take that at first. Instead, by far the best move to take is three ways. And this is not something I learned on my own. I have to shout out to Weba84, the lead developer of the mod. After I tried one or two attempts at Tharbad and just couldn't get a good handle on it, he said, yeah, just take three ways. And so what I would recommend here is this is held by the Kingdom of Adunabar initially, and they will probably hold it for quite a while, and in fact, they are liable to expand either over here to take Sarn Ford for themselves, or up towards Bree and Fornost and Anuminas. So what you may want to do is potentially try to get an alliance with the Reunited Kingdom and wait until Adunabar has put them under some pressure. Maybe even wait until they've taken Bree, and then sneak up here and grab three ways. So you don't necessarily want to rush for it immediately from turn one. You want to let them spend some of their troops in these assaults at these rebel settlements and against the Reunited Kingdom, and then you can charge up here. Three ways is nice because it does have some trade. It's got iron, which is not only a good trade resource, but allows you to build up some construction type of industry buildings, which will speed your construction times. And so it's a nice place to take. You also have livestock here, which is another good trade resource. And of course, it puts you in a great position to take Bree for yourself. That is one of your faction goals. You're going to need to take Bree, at least as going as north as Bree. And in the long run, what you're going to probably do, the easiest way for you to expand, is to essentially become the master of Eriador entirely. Why shouldn't you take Anuminas, for example, and Fornost? You are, of course, a proud Dunedainic faction. So if the civil war here is looking pretty chaotic and you look like you can take advantage of it, then by all means head up here. The Reunited Kingdom is the weaker group here. As you can see, Adunabar starts off with lots of forces, most of which they will spend against rebels and the Reunited Kingdom. So again, wait for them to wear down those forces a bit, and then you can move in. However, you won't be able to ignore the south. More than likely, Dunland will attack you at some time, and they're actually a surprisingly tough foe for you to face. This is because they have lots of javelins. Just about every unit they have has some ranged ability, and all of your troops are going to be relatively small unit sizes, and they're going to be vulnerable to that kind of punishment. So Dunland is going to have a lot of men in their armies. They're going to be throwing spears at you. Then they're going to be closing. Some of them are going to be war crying. Some of them will have the fear effect. And you're not going to be able to just charge over them like the Rohirrim will, because you don't have that strong cavalry force. So you're going to need to rely instead on your ranged troops to try to shoot them down. You're going to need like a full stack, and you're going to have a nicely balanced army to deal with them. The other problem that you may emerge in the south is Rohan. Rohan, of course, is going to be at war with Dunland, and they are very likely to do well. If Rohan does do well and they start to conquer up here, you're going to be at war with them. And that will, of course, mean that you're at war also with their ally, the Reunited Kingdom, which means you're going to be having these long wars that I spoke about earlier, and you're not going to feel like you ever have a break. So you have to sort of determine when is the best time to get involved with wars against Dunland. What I would do is try to get some emissaries and scouts down here to spy out the progression of the war. Dunland is going to try to go for these rebel settlements as well as fighting against Rohan. But if Rohan starts to take the fort here and this city, it's time to move. Or if Dunland starts to make progress against Rohan, then it's time to move. You don't want to see a strong Rohan appear at your southern border because they're going to be very difficult to deal with. And you don't want to see Dunland get too strong either. So the point is, strike when the enemy or when your neighbors have their armies far away. And make sure you've got a large enough force to follow up with those strikes. So let's now load up a game in progress. This is about 40 or so turns in to my campaign as Tharbad. So we're at 392. Actually, more like 80 turns. And you'll see that I have a fairly tough time here. So I did largely what I described to you. I went north for 3 ways first. I watched out as Adunabar advanced against the United Kingdom. And I've actually done fairly well in the north. I've conquered pretty much straight up this road to Fornost. And looking at the diplomacy, I'm just at war with everybody except Dunland. I was able to get a peace with them after beating them and taking Dunhold. You can see that they still have this fort, the Misty Mountains hold. Rohan, though, had taken Dunkreok from them, the fortress of Dul Baran, and Rohan had also taken Anghal, which I was recently able to turn with a scout of my own in their settlement. So I'm very pleased with that. But meanwhile, Dunland went down here and took Dunfata, and they also took Limfalis before I took it from them in the course of our wars. Now I'm locked in this rather intimidating war with Rohan, where they're sending up these stacks of troops, which include Riders of the Mark, pretty intimidating units like that. Let's get a closer look, in fact, at the kind of thing you can expect to face from Rohan if you let them get too big. So this is actually not too bad. They've got a lot of Axes of the Mark, but they do have these Riders of the Mark. Of course, they get cavalry. They've been sending Guards of the King's House at me, which is very difficult to deal with. I just actually, before this turn, came within a stone's throw of getting Dunkreok, but they beat me, and so I've had to kind of reassemble my forces in the north, and I'll do another push south. I did also conquer Swanfleet and Austin Ethel. I did want this because although it's only a minor settlement, this really counts as a fort, basically. You can't build anything here, but it does have gemstones, and it does make a decent amount of money in trade. So we can see here 1162 just from this settlement. That's quite good. I am trading with the dwarves in Moria, so that's where that trade is largely coming from. And getting Swanfleet allows me to take this and pretty much hold it safely, even though there's basically no walls here. And the dwarves, I don't know what this guy's doing, but just wandering around, I guess. So I'm still at war with the Adunabar, but they've been very quiet. The Reunited Kingdom has been slow to strike back as well. And so I'm feeling fairly secure in the north, but the next big challenge will be dealing with these stacks, clearing them out, and then getting my path down here. What I want to do ultimately is take some of the settlements in Rohan, and then I will be feeling a lot better about life, particularly the Hornburg. So this is kind of the termination of the north-south road in some ways. If you take Dunkreok, take the outpost of Dul Baran, and then take the Hornburg, this is fantastic because this is extremely well defended. This has a unique settlement battle map for it, which makes it a joy to defend. And it's also got some great trade resources, gemstones here as well. So I would take that, thus bisecting Rohan's lands. I would also want to take Dunfreka because that's a chief settlement, well built up, and another relatively easy one to hold. And then I could move down into this direction. As you can see, I'm a long way away from my 30 provinces. I'm getting closer to halfway there. But endgame is probably going to see me cleaning up Rohan, as well as finishing the job here in Dunland. And as you can tell, I have not even begun to conquer these settlements in the Minhiriath region. But eventually I will. I'll probably also head towards Lastbridge, and that will get me fairly close to where I want to be. So stay tuned for the battle guide video for Tharbad. Again, this is an interesting faction. They've got some unique challenges, and there's a particular way that you do want to play them so that you don't get too surprised by anyone in the mid-game. So hopefully that's been enjoyable and informative for you. I thank you very much for watching, and I hope you'll see me in the next one. Take care until then. Bye-bye.